It was a Friday afternoon, with the sun already low on the horizon, tinging the sky with orange and red over the pastures of the São Benedito farm, when João Almeida walked through the wooden gate for the last time. Not as an heir, not as a beloved son, not as the boy who grew up among those fences, who learned to plant beans with his father while still a child, who spent years tending the land with his own hands, but as a 32-year-old man who had just buried his father and inherited nothing but a single old mutt with yellowed fur and one half-closed eye, who went by the name of Faísca. As João walked out through the gate with the dog in his arms, back there on the porch of the big house, his older brother Ricardo was already saluting himself. He was signing the papers, laughing loudly with the lawyer, receiving congratulations from relatives. 200 alqueires of fertile land, 3 barns, 22 Nilor steers, 2 trucks, the 4-bedroom main house, the deed to the reservoir, the new tractor his father had bought the previous year. All for Ricardo, for João, the dog. João said nothing. He didn't argue. He didn't cry in front of anyone. He just carefully placed Faísca in the passenger seat of his dented 2008 Gol, started the engine, and drove away without looking back. The dog rested his head on João's arm as he drove, and João, for the first time on that long, heavy day, let a tear roll down his cheek. To understand what happened next, we need to go back a bit. Back to the beginnings. Seu Antonio Almeida, his father, was a simple man. The son of a tenant farmer, he had built the São Benedito farm with his own 2 hands over the course of 40 years. He inherited nothing. He bought an alqueire of dry land, planted grass, brought in 2 oxen, and grew his farm slowly, with the patience of someone who knows that the land doesn't lie. It just takes time. He had 2 sons with Dona Lourdes, his wife, who passed away far too soon, when Ricardo was 12 and João was just 6. Ricardo was the eldest, strong, talkative, confident. He liked to show up at the market, to shake hands, to be seen. He was the kind of man who walks into a room and is immediately the centre of the conversation. His father was proud of the way his eldest son carried himself. He believed a man needed presence to lead. João was different. He was quiet, observant, patient. While Ricardo slept in late on weekends, João was already up at 5 in the morning, helping his father tend to the animals. He learned to read the sky before the rain. He learned that the earth speaks, that the cattle warn you when something is wrong, that nature has its own language for those who are patient enough to listen. His father would always say, placing his hand on his youngest son's shoulder, "João, you're just like the earth. No one sees what's inside until they dig deep." João held on to that phrase for the rest of his life. But when Seu Antonio fell ill, a silent cancer that took 2 years to do what time hadn't managed, it was Ricardo who took the reins. He began managing the farm, talking to the lawyer, and signing contracts on his father's behalf. João tried to get involved. He tried to talk to his brother about the decisions, but Ricardo always found a way to leave him out. He said that João was too naive to run a farm, that he was a good kid but lacked a firm hand, that a property of that size needed someone who wouldn't feel sorry about firing good-for-nothing farmhand. João put up with all of it. He continued to help his father during those last few months, taking him to the hospital, picking up medicine, sleeping in a hospital chair, while Ricardo was out partying in town. And when Mr. Antonio died, and the will was read by the lawyer in a cold room that smelled of old paper, Ricardo, the land, the cattle, the trucks, the house, the entire farm. João, the dog. The relatives laughed, some out of genuine pity, others with that cruel laugh of those who think life has dealt justice to the weak. One aunt even commented in a low voice, but loud enough for João to hear, "Mr. Antonio was always stubborn. He left the biggest fool with nothing." João folded the will, put it in his pocket, and went to get Faísca from the kennel. Faísca was 11 years old. By canine standards, he was a gentleman of nearly 70 in human years. He had yellowish fur, one ear standing up and the other drooping, and an eye that would half close when he was pensive, and anyone who's never had an old dog might not understand. But old dogs have a wisdom in their eyes that's intimidating. His father had received Faísca as a gift from a neighbour when the dog was just 2 months old, and from the very first day, the dog had chosen João. He slept in his room. He followed him around the farm. He sat by his side when João read on the porch. He ignored Ricardo with an almost offensive elegance. In the small 2-room apartment João rented in town, where he worked as a maintenance technician at a cooperative, Faísca adapted quickly. He had the old rug, the leather bone João had brought from the farm, and an aluminum bowl that Seu Antonio used to give water to the animals. João had also brought a few things from his father's bedroom. Not for their material value. They were simple things. A dark wooden drawer that had sat on the nightstand, with a rusty bronze handle. A framed photo of the two of them fishing in a stream when João was about 8 years old. An old rosary that his father prayed with every night. João placed the drawer in the corner of the room, on top of a cardboard box. He hadn't gotten around to opening it yet. It seemed wrong to rush into opening his father's things before he was ready. 3 weeks after the funeral, in the early hours of a Wednesday morning, João woke up to Faísca barking softly, but insistently, in the room. It wasn't a bark of fear. It wasn't that high-pitched bark a dog makes when it sees a stranger or hears a noise. It was a deep, measured bark, almost as if the animal were calling someone over to show them something. João turned on the light. Faísca was standing in front of the dark wooden drawer. João looked at the dog. The dog looked at the drawer. Then it looked at João. Then at the drawer again. João laughed, that weary early morning laugh, and said, "All right, Faísca, you can go back to sleep." But the dog didn't sleep. He stayed there. He slowly scratched at the wood with his paw. He sniffed at the crack. He sat down. He waited. The same thing happened the next night, and the next. Every night Faísca would go over to the drawer. He'd stand there. He'd wait. On the 4th night, João couldn't ignore it anymore. He got out of bed. He walked over to the corner of the room. He crouched in front of the drawer while Faísca sat beside him, suddenly quiet, as if he knew the moment had come. João pulled the bronze handle. The drawer creaked as it opened. Inside the drawer were 3 things. A letter folded in 4, with the name João written on the front, in his father's shaky, slanted handwriting. That handwriting João would recognise anywhere in the world. An envelope sealed with red wax, also bearing his name. And the photo of the two of them fishing in the stream. The same one that was framed on top of the cabinet. But this one was smaller, pocket-sized, worn at the edges from being kept and opened so many times. João stood still for a moment. Faísca nuzzled his knee. João picked up the letter. He opened it slowly, with the care of someone opening something that cannot be undone. His father's handwriting, shaky but steady. João, my son, if you're reading this, it's because Faísca did what I asked him to do. Yes, son, I spent 3 months training that old dog to lead you to this drawer when you were alone. I always knew he obeyed you more than anyone else, so I entrusted to him what I couldn't tell you in person. I need you to understand why the will turned out the way it did. Ricardo isn't a bad person, but he's a man who needs to feel like he's won. If I had split it evenly, he'd be fighting with you for the next 30 years. He'd challenge everything at the registry office. He'd turn our relatives against you, and he'd cause you trouble you don't deserve. I know my oldest son. He's my flesh and blood, but he's stubborn and proud, just like my father was. So I did things differently. Inside this envelope are the deeds to a 40 alqueires farm in Minas Gerais, in the municipality of Presidente Olegario. It's been registered in your name for 12 years, son. I bought it when you were 18, right after you helped me get through the 2009 drought without losing the cattle. Remember, you stayed up 3 nights in a row digging a ditch to bring water from the stream. I've never forgotten it. I didn't tell you about the farm so as not to cause any trouble while I was still here. Ricardo never knew. Not even the lawyer. The deed was registered at a notary's office in Patos de Minas, far from here. But there's more, João. 2 years ago, an engineer from a water resources company approached me privately. He surveyed the region and told me that beneath that farm, there's a massive aquifer, one of the largest groundwater reserves in that part of Minas. He said it's worth more than the entire São Benedito ranch. I keep his report inside the envelope as well. I didn't sell it because I wanted to save it for you. Water is the gold of the future. João, you've always known how to take care of what's valuable. Ricardo would have sold it cheaply at the first offer. Take care of Faísca. He's older than he should be, but he still has a few years left. That dog has been more loyal to you than many people who call themselves family. I love you, son. You were never the weakest. You were always the deepest. Your father, Antonio. João sat on the bedroom floor for a time he couldn't even measure himself. It could have been 20 minutes. It could have been 2 hours. Faísca stayed by his side the whole time, quiet with his head resting on João's lap. When João opened the envelope, he found exactly what his father had described. The notarized deed, registered in his name. The technical report from the hydrologist with maps, measurements, volume estimates, and the commercial value of the groundwater. In the months that followed, João kept a low profile. He didn't mention it to anyone. He travelled twice to Presidente Olegario to see the property. A simple piece of land, dry on the surface, full of savanna, that no one would give a second glance to from the road. He hired a lawyer from another city. He consulted 2 engineers. He spoke with 3 different companies in the water resources sector. 6 months after the day he left the farm with Faísca in his arms, João signed a groundwater exploitation lease agreement with a large company. He didn't have to sell the farm. He didn't have to ask anyone for anything. He simply leased the exploitation rights for 20 years, with monthly royalties that far exceeded anything the São Benedito farm could ever yield. It was a Monday when João's phone rang, showing his brother's number. It took João 3 rings to answer. Not out of anger, simply because he was busy. He was in a meeting with a civil engineer discussing the renovation of the house he had bought. João. Ricardo's voice sounded different. Lower, without that usual confidence. I've heard some things about a farm in Minas, about the water. Silence. I wanted to talk, brother. I think we need to... João let his brother finish his sentence. He listened patiently to everything. Then he replied slowly, without anger, without irony, without a triumphant tone. Ricardo, Dad knew what he was doing. He always did. I have nothing to settle with you. You got what he wanted to give you. I got what he wanted to give me. Pause. My father was right, Ricardo. The earth always reveals what's inside, but only to those who have the patience to dig. And he hung up. On the other side of the apartment, which was now bigger, with nicer rugs and a window overlooking the garden, Faísca was sleeping on the couch, with one ear drooping and one eye half closed. João looked at the dog for a moment. Good boy, Faísca. His tail wagged slowly, without him even opening his eye. Al otro lado del departamento, ahora más grande, con alfombras más bonitas y una ventana que daba al jardín, Faísca dormía en el sofá, con la oreja caída y el ojo medio cerrado. João miró al perro por un momento. Bien hecho, Faísca. La cola se movió lentamente, sin siquiera abrir el ojo.